Hi everyone and welcome to this week's episode of Fight Chat Friday from TKD Coach Academy. So this week is a very different episode. I don't have Richie. I'm not on my own, however, and I will be chatting this week with Master Paul McPhail. We're going to talk about mentoring and what it means to us now and what it has meant in the past in ITF Taekwondo. So if this is a conversation that sounds very interesting to you, I recommend staying with us for the full chat. And Master McPhail, there you are. How's things today?
Hi. Good, great, thank you. Good evening, everyone.
So, Master McPhail, if you don't mind, will you do a little bit of an introduction of yourself? So rather than me telling everybody about you, do you want to give us the 5-point synopsis of your path through Taekwondo?
Sure. I'm a Taekwondo enthusiast, ITF enthusiast. Began training in 1975 here in New Zealand. Since that time, I've been on various committees within our country to help out, from our old executive committee through to today on the technical advisory panel, it's called, which is a fancy name for a technical committee.
Okay.
At the moment, I'm on the ITF Technical Committee, and just help things keep running more on the technical front. So pretty busy. Also look after the website and other bits and pieces.
As well as, of course, your own website and your own, full-time Taekwondo Academy in terms of Warrior Taekwondo in Auckland. So
that's right. I forgot about that. Yeah. So
it probably
TKD
keeps you busy.
coaching is, that was something I started in 2015, which is sort of my passion project. And also, I'm a professional instructor. I did that since 1985. I have a full-time academy, which is a full-time facility. We have about 9 instructors who are contractors and a full-time admin manager. And I also have another more normal club, which is run out of a school hall. So those 2 clubs keep me busy in the evenings.
I like that, in the evenings when you're not busy with your other work. So.
Yes, pretty much.
You know what? But I think it was really important, and again, a huge thank you for joining us or joining me today to chat through this topic, because when I thought about the topic, there are some people who I think can give some really good insight into this, but with the mix of experiences that you have, both in terms of your own journey as a student and instructor in Taekwondo, what you've done in working with the organisation in New Zealand and developing that organisation and your part in that, and then of course with the website and now your role with the ITF Technical Committee, that whole concept of mentorship I think is going to come up again and again and again. But if we might start when you began your training in 1975, as you say, who was your instructor, and then what was your relationship with that instructor when you decided that you would open up your own club?
My instructor was Mr. Norman Ing, and he actually started our first club in New Zealand back in 1970. He began training in 1969 with some other friends in New Zealand, started his club in 1970, and then I joined in 75. I trained with him for 5 years because that was where I was brought up, and then I moved to Wellington, which is the capital, to study. And that's when I looked around all the local clubs and decided to join a club which was instructed by Master Evan Davidson. He was a 3rd degree black belt then. Since that time, he and I have kind of come through the grades together. So he's an 8th degree black belt as well now. And so the decision after that to start my own club was 5 years after that. So it was after I'd been training about 10 years, I decided to move to Auckland and start a club for myself. As far as sort of the relationship goes, in New Zealand, we're all friends. So the whole thing is very organic. It was just a bunch of friends who loved Taekwondo, and it was just the natural next step to go and start a club. There was just no question about it, really. It was just sort of what we loved to do. Yeah.
So it wasn't something that you were on the worst end coerced into doing, or on the best end strongly encouraged to do. This was something that just organically developed because that's what people were doing at the time.
Yeah, it was a little bit of both actually. I was on the executive committee. I was the secretary of the national body at that time, and that's where I met now Master Rocky Routhwaite,
Mm.
and because he was on that committee as well, and he had opened a club before me in Auckland, and we hit it off, started training together, and he would invite me from Wellington to Auckland for demonstrations and trainings and so on. And he said, "Come on, man, you've really got to come and go professional," because I was a freelance musician at this time in Wellington.
Wow.
And so he said, "Come on, chuck that in, come and do Taekwondo. I'll set it all up for you." Now, training with him in
Okay.
his club was a man called Peter Graham, who's now Master Peter Graham. So you can
Yeah.
see all these names are all still
Well,
around.
well, that's fantastic, isn't it?
Yeah, and he found the venue, did the advertising. I walked in on my first night of my first club to over 100 members on the floor and just
Wow.
started teaching. It was like the dream first night as an instructor. And that was my sort of intro to being a professional instructor. So yeah,
So,
it was a big shift, but I had that encouragement from my friends to go and do it.
so yeah, right from the beginning, you had a peer group or a support network of, a community of coaches, friends, and Taekwondo enthusiasts, and you didn't have to figure out all of the modeling of it from scratch. So there was a couple of people who had some ideas for you and helped you with how to find a location, a venue, how to market or advertise in order to enroll the students, and what way to set things up. And how does that compare to how things work nowadays in New Zealand?
It's the same, really.
Ah,
We've
but
got such a long way to go, because that's why my generation, we scratch our head and think, why don't people open a club now? But we're not providing the training. We're not really teaching them enough of how to do it, or providing a way where they can just walk into teaching like I had.
mm,
Everyone's left to their own devices. I mean, there's a lot of help and resources for sure, but somehow we need more, because at the moment, with it being a lot busier in the world generally, we're finding we're not getting new clubs anywhere
sure.
like we used to. So that's a big problem.
So that's I think that's one that I'm going to definitely tap into and come back to later on. That element of the mentorship will focus, I suppose, on what happens after the club has set up, is open, and the instructor is working away. But there is a huge bridge to cross to get a person who is happy enough training in their own club in the first instance to make that big jump. And in particular, I think it's true all across the world, it's even more difficult to have a female instructor decide to step out and become the lead instructor in her own club or her own venue. And I think there's a lot that we can look at in terms of why that might be. But if we just jump right back into that mentorship. So you started your club with 1985, you had 100 students on the floor with help from, Master Roundthwaite and Master Graham and people like that at the time. What would or how would you compare the, maybe compare is the wrong thing, but how would you say the next steps went, or where did you turn to? What kind of support would you have looked for at that time as a budding instructor?
I think what I remember of that time is, I can't say enough of the network of friends we had. For example, James Rimmer, who is now a master,
Mm-hmm.
he was in Wellington originally with me, and he would come to my flat during the day, and we would train together, even though he was meant to be at work. So then he moved to a different city. But when I started up my own club, I had all these people coming to stay and coming to see the club and coming to visit and train on the weekend. So there was this network of people around me the whole time, and it was just so exciting. Like, this was a big new thing I was trying to set up. And so I had Rocky Routhwaite, Peter Graham, some other people sort of who were in the organisation
Mm.
who would give me advice, because Peter Graham, for example, was a successful businessman, so he knew about advertising, and in those days typesetting and how to do posters and stuff. So he would help me with all that side of it. plenty of help with people that knew how to run a business and so on. In the beginning, I used to buy in uniforms from a martial arts supplier in Wellington for the students, but then I thought, I should try and do that myself. So I ended up buying fabric and cutting it out with scissors on my lounge floor and having an outwork and sew up the uniforms. And then I'd drive to the screen printers and I'd do everything myself. So I sort of learnt on the ground how to run a business. So yeah, plenty of advice, plenty of friends, people coming to train, just so much activity and things going on. And always I was pushing forward for training myself. I was really heavily into training and doing my gradings and trying to keep up with that side of it and keeping fit as well. So yeah, it was a crazy time.
Yeah, I'm sure you're glad you don't have to lay out the fabric on the floor and do the dough box that way anymore. There's definitely an effort to reward kind of ratio that probably doesn't work out in your favor over time when you're hand sewing the dough box. But
I did it for a few years though.
Wow. Okay. Well, I can honestly tell you I've never done that one, but I was expecting when you said that one, the mistake that many people made in my era, which was, well, you didn't know where to go, so you probably went to your local sports store, or you went to you were buying from something off the back of a magazine and having it shipped in, or there was the distributorships weren't as well organized as they are now, and getting your equipment, it wasn't an easy thing, and you were generally paying very, very consumer prices for often buying retail quantities of items, so it was a difficult thing to start with.
Yeah, I think there was only one martial arts supplier. There might have been two, but yeah, there wasn't many choices of where to get the gear and the uniforms and so on from. So I must have had a bit of an entrepreneurial bone in me. I'm going to find out how that's done, and sort of went from the ground up and worked out how to do all these things, which is cool, really, and that enabled me to learn and to figure out the business side of things. And for many years, I remember we didn't earn very much money at all. We were really scraping for many years. And I think that probably turned around when I decided to do children's classes, because at that point I wasn't going to teach kids. That was, I'm not going to have children in my class, it was just for 12-year-olds or whatever.
It's the Hollywood maxim, never work with children or animals, isn't it?
That's right. But one of my members said, I'll take the kids if you have them. And so I said, okay, well, you can do that at 5:00 and then I'll arrive at 6. That's fine. And the membership just ballooned, of course. As we know, the kids market, especially back then, was amazing. So that opened my eyes in the sense of growing your club. It's really through the kids is the way you do that.
Yeah, I mean, for the stability and the backbone often comes through the teens and the adults, but the sustainable scale of the club often comes through the kids. There's very few people who I think nowadays operate. We have almost the opposite problem happening, where clubs are light on adults and aren't attracting adult beginners, and it's I think that's a whole other side of it, and that's something that people could be helped with, encouraged, challenged even to try to redevelop that aspect of it, I think.
Yeah, I tell people now, if you want adults, then get kids, because families is the key, and the older sibling or the parent, they will join. I guarantee it. They will join before long. If they're sitting at the back for longer than a few weeks. I've got one of my assistant instructors. He's fantastic at just encouraging people off the chairs at the back of the hall and onto the floor, and he even runs a weekend class at his home for parents.
Wow.
Or for people who don't feel ready to jump in. And there's this network of parents and family members who eventually join, and sometimes I don't even realize they've been training with Mr. Reynolds for months on a Saturday, and I don't even know. So we've got a really nice little network of things going on where I don't even have to know or worry about a lot of things. People just do things like that, which is very, very cool.
Okay, now I'm absolutely going to segue off of the way that you've said that into the idea of culture. And I think, a lot of what's involved in that mentorship, and really what we're talking about here is that support, where you as a coach, as an instructor, you need support because you don't know everything. And well, actually, to be honest, you'll always need the support because you'll never know everything. And the more complex the profession or the vocation of coaching becomes, the more support you need in more areas, because every year it seems like you need a new skill in order to be to feel proficient. But one of the things that's super important in terms of mentorship is that establishing of culture. So you have that, no matter who you trained with, you were brought up in a culture of a club or an organization. And I think for me, my experience of it was many years ago. My original instructor is Master Tim Forde, who thankfully he's still training, and we're very good friends still to this day. But I grew up in the culture that he established. But then for a while, when I was 15, he moved away. He was living elsewhere, and I had a different instructor and a completely different culture that changed the membership of the club 180. And then I took over the club I was 19, so that was in 1998. So I've had the club since then. And then it's been about that, how do you generate your own culture, and then how does that culture fit within the culture of an organization? And I think one of the things that struck me, because you may not know this, my first visit to New Zealand and to, it wasn't ITKD then, but it was, obviously it's the same people, but I was in New Zealand in 2005, and that would have been the time I was when Willie van der Mortel had been contracted. He was starting to work with the national team at that stage, and I was training around Andrew Niven's clubs in Auckland and visiting and bouncing from place to place, and I got to jump in and...
You didn't come visit me.
Well, do you know the sad thing is I don't think I really knew you at the time, but we've had a better chance to connect since then. I was visiting Carolina Dillon at the time, so she had spent some time with me in Ireland, and I was returning the favour and coming to visit New Zealand. And there was I think some seminars with Master van der Mortel that were going on in some of the venues that Andrew Niven was operating out of at the time, and I was like, well, I'll jump into those sessions, and I met everybody. Wow. So that was my first introduction to it. But what struck me was not the skill or the talent of the people on the floor or anything along those lines. It was the culture of the organisation. And out of that first training session, I ended up being given a Jeep on Waiheke to go for a drive around, and I was introduced to a family who were building a house out there, so it was their Jeep. And we borrowed the Jeep and we went around, and we were able to kind of tour the island, visit the island, and we came back and we went and we called into somebody else, on our way down to Taupo, and all those kind of things came out of one training session, in a Auckland Grammar or something that way. And it was like, oh well, this is a hell of an organisation. And the thing is, for me, the culture side of things is one of the things that is hardest to put a finger on. But once upon a time, it followed that like linear hierarchical kind of thing. So there was a relationship to your own instructor, and the chances were that the culture that you would establish in your club would be a lot like the culture that you came from your instructor. But I think New Zealand was one of the first times that I came across something much more organizational in tone. That there wasn't a culture that was only because of the direct instructor. There was a culture because, well, that was the culture in the organization. So is there anything that you can put a finger on as to how that might have started, or was there any direct, I would say, deliberate thinking behind that?
No, I don't think it's deliberate. I think it's just that we've all been friends and we've all come up together, and there's that mutual respect for each other, and we mentor each other, sort of whether we know it or not. So, for example, at the moment, I can think of 1, 2, 3, 4 that just off the top of my head, weekly classes that go on, which are nothing to do with normal club sessions. You'd call them mentoring sessions really, because they're the seniors getting together to train and talk. And this happens around the country all the time. So, for example, in Wellington, there's a group that, it's because there's a grading coming up. Sure, that's the excuse. But they get together and they train and they get to know each other. And then gosh, in Wellington they probably go out for a beer after, I'm not too sure. But so there's a sort of mentoring going on, but it's not structured. I think it probably would be, it should be maybe. And then in Auckland we have Master Byrne, who works with the senior dans. Now they did that also for the excuse with the grading coming up, but they've continued it after their grading, so they all got their masters grading. So we have a new sort of batch of masters that came through, and they've just continued. Every week they get together and train, and then they go and have a coffee and they chat, and it's so that sort of thing is happening all around the country all the time. Master Rimmer also doing the same in Tauranga with his crew. So it's nothing that's been formalized or intended really, other than it's sort of started by the same key people, and then the next generation tend to do that as well, and they carry on that kind of tradition of getting together on the weekend and doing some TKD.
Yeah, so if you were to throw a formal name on it, you know, you have communities of practice, but at the same time, you know, formally naming it or anything doesn't matter. In the end, it's what happens. It's the bonds and the investment in each other and the caring for each other that actually comes out of that, and the sharing of the skills, the knowledge and experience that come out of that. That's where the value is, and like how wonderful that it happens organically and hasn't had to be manipulated into place by the organization as such. But you know, it's when it does happen and it does work like that, what a fantastic outcome.
Yeah. So on an organizational level, the culture we have is very much a group of like-minded friends who are very enthusiastic, and we support each other 100%. So when we have two annual things, we have a Masters Summit, and we have what's called Stripes 1-to-1, which is anyone with stripes. We get together and we train from 1 p.m. to 1 p.m. We do 24 hours without sleep. Actually, no, we sleep. But
I would hope so.
So, yeah, we have this regular sort of thing that helps with our culture. On a club level, it's interesting because I have two main clubs, as I mentioned, and they both have completely different cultures. And that's really interesting because I have the opportunity to kind of play with that a little bit. So my first club was the school hall one. It's a traditional club. And our culture there is, it's a real team effort. We have a real fixation with standard. So we will not let anybody grade until they've gone through this pre-grading process, which many don't get through. And they know that the standard is so high that they're probably going to fail that pre-grading the first time or two, especially at certain levels. Like getting from green stripe to green belt is one area where I'm really fussy, because we have a senior class, and before they move into that senior class, I want to make sure they know what they're doing. So we have this culture of the standard is everything. They train hard, and it's not about just moving your arms and legs around. You've got to have intent. You've got to be able to look like you can defend yourself. You can kick and punch hard, and there's that fitness level. So it's a sort of a traditional, sort of a harder club, if you like, and I love it. Like that's my original club, and that's yeah, we all just love that. The other club, I love it as well, but it's totally different. Speaking of Carolina Dillon, she started the club, and I took over the club. Yeah, full-time facility, paid instructors, manager. I only go in there and take a senior class. I don't even know most of the members, so I have to delegate. I have to leave it to the guys to take care of. Now we get together for meetings, kind of, and sort of sometimes we do little workshops and things. We try and do that monthly or 6 weekly. So we're always in touch with each other as instructors, but it's a lot of separate little classes going on in this facility, and a lot of the students don't know each other. A lot of the students would never have seen each other, and actually that's why the Zoom lockdowns have been good, because we've got to know the students a little bit better by seeing them online. But anyway, so the culture of that club is more of a business sort of school, like you'd think of an American martial arts school set up. different culture. So if we
to take it in a different one, it's actually set up, I think, in a lot more like a team sport might be, where one coach will take a team of coaches will take a particular age group, and then they move through, and they meet another coach or another set of coaches when they move to the next age group or to the next level.
Right.
It sounds very much like that environment that does take place within team sport, and it's considered perfectly normal. But within the martial arts, the Taekwondo world, it's almost like an expectation that the senior instructor will see all of the classes, know all of the students, and have that direct interaction. So
yeah, so it's not the traditional model, right? So
no,
that's
right.
why I'm still a bit uneasy with it, to be honest, because I feel bad for not knowing who all the students in the club are, but that's just a fact of it. And
how do you imagine that Master Anderson in Trondheim feels about that one?
I know,
Yeah,
I know. Can only imagine. Yeah, and so the culture is different. It's still good, but for example, if we have a tournament, we're not going to get many from that club turn up generally. Where at the other club, the Papakura club, the support is fantastic. Everyone's going to be there because everyone's saying, "Oh, see you on Saturday," or "Have you entered yet?" So there's that sort of different culture going on. So yeah, so each club has got its own kind of culture, I guess, and depending on how it's set up and how the instructor runs things. Some are like me, where standard is the most important thing, sort of the physical standard and the etiquette standard and that sort of thing is super important. Others not so much. Others more, you get some clubs I can think of that are very much sporting side of things clubs, so they're into the tournaments and that's what they do. So that's sort of got a different culture around it as well, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely. I think coming back to your club in Warrior Club in Auckland, I've seen your instructor's manual. So I don't know if you penned it exactly, but with the idea of just, I suppose trying to standardize some expectations, really, I think would be the way my take on it would be around, what it is to be an instructor within the club and what the role and responsibilities, are involved in that. Was there anything that made you realize you needed something like that, or was it just realizing you weren't going to get to know everyone and see everything that was going on there?
It's hard to say how that sort of came about. I mean, I think it was because I knew we all weren't going to see each other on a regular basis like a normal club, so we had to find a way to give those expectations to the instructors so they knew exactly what I expected of them, and it was a way of setting up these regular meetings that we have and getting systems in place, basically, because if you're running a sort of a biggish business, a large business like that, you've got to have systems in place to make it all work. So that document was created by I've just had a mind blank, from Canada, one of my good friends from Canada. Oh, I'm sorry. It says it in the front of the document. Anyway, we stole it, basically, with permission.
Yeah.
And Master Benicevic and I kind of adapted it for the New Zealand scene, and then we rolled it out to our clubs, and it's just been fantastic. So we have in both of our clubs, we have a leadership team system. So when you come through the grades, if you look as if you might be interested or have some potential in instructing, we might invite you onto what we call the leadership team. So they work by helping out in a club as a volunteer.
Yeah.
And then that manual is given to the leadership team, and so they sort of learn the basics of instructing and the expectations of what we have. Then they may get invited on to be what we call a paid intern, and then they might become an assistant instructor of a class, and then a lead instructor of a class, and then maybe eventually assistant instructor. So there's a pathway. We've got a very set pathway in the clubs where people can see that's where they can go if that's what interests them.
But I think that really encapsulates what I had in mind, I suppose, in this discussion is, we've talked about how, in your case, it's evolved from where it was very much a community of coaches or a community of friends, really, who later became instructors and so on, who then supported each other through the initial, growth and development, and I'm sure learned from each other's successes and failures and experiments, over time, and rolled with it over time to find out what worked, to where now, as things have grown and scaled, you're now having to look at maybe formalizing some steps of the process a little bit more, using other people, other systems and so on to help the person grow and move through the steps and stages involved.
Yeah, we've definitely reached a level where I feel like we've gone almost as far as we can on that system, and we now need some more solid mentoring processes set up so that it can go sort of to the next level. Especially, we've got an aging instructor base as well. That's a consideration, and what are the next generation like? How are they going to handle things? So we've really got to help set up that for the future. I get the feeling your organisation is similar. Is it a group of friends that have come through together?
Certainly the first generation is exactly that, and a lot of the internal growth of the organisation is people who would have grown up directly, involved with that group of instructors, and they have their own almost network, so there's a generation of people who are very close friends who've worked together for a great many years. And then there's a new generation of instructors who, we would probably say are in their late 20s and 30s for the most part, that, there's a slightly different circle of connections there. And both groups do, of course, interact and get on well, but I would say there is a generational gap in there a little bit as well. But I think what's interesting for me out of that kind of thing is that we, like yourselves, it's not immediately apparent to people that they might consider opening a club anymore. Now, we have maybe a slightly different problem compared to New Zealand, where you can go to, and our favourite example is you can go to County Cork, where there are well over 100 Taekwondo clubs. So if you want to open a new club according to the traditional models of things, find a new population centre and go in there, it's not an easy thing to do, because you are probably going directly into competition with an existing club from one organisation or another.
Right.
So we're now looking at and starting to really think about as well that legacy issue that you've described, which is, well, what about the instructors in their 50s and 60s and 70s in some cases? The traditional path in Taekwondo doesn't handle retirement very well. It doesn't structure clubs to be businesses that get handed on in some ways very well, or structure them like a sports club might be, where the club is the entity and the instructors move through over time. So we're having to look at and consider, well, what does this look like in 20 years? And I don't think we've arrived with an answer that everybody agrees with, but I think we all recognize that it's something that you didn't have to consider when you were 25 and 30. And as people move into their 50s and 60s, they're kind of thinking, well, maybe this is something we need to consider. How do we make sure that there's a legacy, and it doesn't just happen that a club runs for 40 years, closes down, and then somebody opens a brand new club in the same location or similar location a month or two later after it closes? It doesn't seem like the best way to preserve the legacy of something that has done so much for the Taekwondo community.
Yeah, we're lucky in New Zealand. We've got a very solid board structure. We have a new CEO actually, who is amazing. He was the CEO of rugby league in New Zealand for many years.
Okay.
And he's straight away identified the areas of concern for for planning for the future, and setting out processes of addressing those things, starting with the most urgent things. Just as an example, we have an amazing database system in New Zealand that does everything for us, but it's custom made. And the person that wrote it has been doing that since 1990 for us for free, and he cannot continue to do that forever. We're going to need a system that is not reliant on one person eventually. So these sort of glaring things hitting the new CEO, and it's okay, we need to address these things and set up for the future, which is really great. So our board is, we have a CEO and board members who sit, I'm not sure how your structure is, but it sits aside from what we call the DO side, which is the committees who look after the tournaments and the techniques and the standards of discipline and the different committees. So they approve the budget and look at the big picture stuff, and then we get on and do the work. So that's happening now, and I really think in the next couple of years we'll address a lot of those things that we desperately need to, is to try and set up for the future properly, where until now we've just been managing pretty well on just good friends and it happening organically. But we've really got to plan more carefully for the future, because the new guys, they're just not starting new clubs. They're not. I really don't understand. I still don't understand it, why someone would go to a job they hate and earn not very good money, where there's so much scope in New Zealand. Honestly, you could open a club. We've only got like 20 clubs in Auckland or something.
And it's the size of Dublin.
Almost anywhere, and earn and earn really good money working the evenings. If you got yourself sorted. But people just don't want to do it. I don't understand.
It is amazing. That, and I can, most of my close friends and that would know that here, but I spoke with Andrew when I was there in 2005, and I came within a hair's breadth of moving to New Zealand at that point in time. And just shortly before you took over Warrior from Carolina, I also considered moving at that point in time, and I'm not saying anything that the people in ITA don't know, so that's but it certainly has jumped out there a couple of times as a possibility. But the we will continue to keep an eye on what you're doing on the organizational level, because certainly for us, a lot of what shaped our organizational efforts was looking at countries like New Zealand, where there was a more cohesive structure from many years ago. Where in Ireland we followed that same path. We had that community of practice of quite close friends working together, and it all working quite well while it was all a group of close friends. And then of course scale becomes a thing. So as an organization grows, as clubs grow, as as the area around you becomes more densely populated with other instructors and so on, if you don't have those systems, relationships, the mentorships and all those kind of things built in, it becomes really, stress fractures build over time, and they have to be addressed. So for us, we're definitely looking at it in the same way as you are, that if we're to sustain growth, if we're to to grow our sport and make it a little bit more mainstream, and I know I do refer to it as sport a lot, that's my mentality, but if Taekwondo is to be more mainstream within the environment in Ireland, for example, we do have to continue to grow and to have clubs and dojangs opening in locations that we don't currently have them, and so on. And it won't happen by accident. There's now, I think one of the big things that we haven't really touched on, but it's worth mentioning, is even when there's if you started in 1985 and then in terms of running your club, and it was pretty much 15 years later or 13 years later when I took over my club, still the regulatory requirements at the time were probably quite similar in both countries. Nothing drastic was involved. You had to have your insurance, but that was pretty much it. You secured a venue, you had your insurance, and away you went. Whereas now there's so much more involved in certification and safeguarding and child protection, in police regard, vetting and all those kind of things that are involved, that I think it scares people a little bit, all of the extra things that they feel are expected of them, where we're trying to say, no, you'll be fine, just jump in there and we'll help you swim, Yeah,
we didn't have anything. We still don't need insurance. You can just go and start a club now. But we have it, and our organisation provides it for all the clubs.
Okay.
Public liability insurance, so if one of the kids burns down the school hall, you're kind of covered type of thing. But we have ACC, which is accident compensation insurance here, so there's no medical insurance or anything like that. So it's pretty simple. But yeah, all the new regulations, yeah, they're really a part of what an important part of what our organisation does is to have those in place there. So the police vetting you must have before you start, and so on. So yeah, it's all it's there's a little bit more to it. It's becoming an instructor, I guess, but we step people through it, and we make it as easy as possible for people. So it's not, in New Zealand, it's not anywhere near as bad as in some countries with regulations and so on. It's pretty straightforward. And as an organisation too, you've got to decide what your goals are, right? You mentioned growth and everything, and that's growth in numbers is not something that is really one of our goals anymore. It's to be recognised. We want to be recognised in any town in the country as the go-to martial art.
Okay.
That's sort of one of our goals. And another one of our big goals is to support our instructors, so provide instructor development. That's that's definitely the number 2 thing, or number 1, number 2 thing. So we no longer have a goal to be, at one stage we wanted to be 10,000 members, and so we had a number we were aiming for, and no one really is motivated by that so much.
Yeah, certainly not club by club. It's not going to motivate them.
The go-to martial art. Yeah. So you mentioned your growth is so that you can get sort of recognition and stuff, right? So you can be recognised as a...
Yeah, maybe not so much for our organisation, but certainly in relation to where we have ITF Taekwondo in the country. So, there's a tendency, and I know it's very much the same because we have the same philosophy among the sport leaders and government in New Zealand and in Ireland around, there's the sports of national significance. And, if you're not one of those, and it's different sports in Ireland and in New Zealand. I mean, we have the Gaelic games, we have the soccer in particular, and then you could include sports like boxing, athletics and sailing. Now, you might go to New Zealand and, well, sailing is there, rugby is there, but then you also include sports like netball, which wouldn't be, and cricket, which wouldn't be ones for us to the same degree. But in New Zealand, those ones get a certain amount of additional eyes on because of the status that they're held in by the state. And we know that maybe supplanting one of those sports isn't a realistic goal, but we don't want to be left out of the conversation when it comes to developmental and structural decisions that are being made at a sporting level. So it's a little bit of a sidetrack to our conversation, but in terms of like our growth goals, it really is more around, in terms of supporting our instructors and so on, we need to have some facility to do that. And part of that is being part of the conversation at a national level. But yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Excuse me, I'll just pull the curtain a little bit.
Oh, by all means. So for anybody who's watching, it is
a nice sunny day.
Yeah, it was probably still dark in the morning when Master McPhail came onto the call. So the sun has just risen in New Zealand.
But coming into summer, which will be nice. I'm looking forward to it.
Fantastic. We're going very much the opposite way here, of course. But so maybe just to wrap up the conversation on, in terms of going back to our mentorship, how do you feel, or where do you feel there's scope to really leverage that idea, or do you think it's on an organizational level or on an interpersonal level, or where do you feel kind of the ownership for the idea of mentorship lies?
Yes, I think it's an organisational level now. I haven't mentioned another thing that we've been doing for a number of years is we've got an instructor development officer in each area. Sort of fancy word for, if you've got a problem, go to this person, they'll help you. And that could be an admin question, or it could be, because they're normally a senior member, could be, can you come in and watch me teach and give me some feedback?
Okay, wow.
Yeah, and no one does it.
I was going to
Because
say,
everyone's too scared to do that. Yeah, which again, I don't understand. When I was starting out, I would have loved for someone to sit on the side of the class and give me some hints on what I was doing wrong. But yeah, so we've got these IDOs in different regions they're really meant to be the mentors. So we've set that up, and it does work to an extent. For example, Master Rounthwaite's the IDO for his region, and he gets all his seniors together and they do trainings and they chat and stuff. So it kind of works, but it requires a real push from him to make that happen. So it's we need more things like that set up, I think, to force people into it, and then once they get going, they'll realize the benefits of doing it. Another thing is trying to find members in your organization that could be really good at this stuff. Like at the moment, they don't have a role, for example, and they might be fantastic mentors for people. So looking around and finding people that can be good mentors, setting that up somehow would be a really good idea, I think, because we've got so much, all organizations have so much talent and people out there that really want to do things. And this could be a good way of getting them involved rather than just the normal being on a committee or organizing something.
I can tell you that certainly resonates with me over here on two fronts. The first being, how do you activate some of those really talented and knowledgeable people that are within the organization who might not yet have a role? And it certainly seems like it could be a very good fit. And then the second, and I do a lot of work in coach support, but the thing that people find most challenging is the exposing themselves, showing their coaching, Excuse me, I had that one building up for a second. But exposing and showing themselves coaching, because if you haven't come through a culture or a system where that's the norm, it's quite a challenging thing to do. Because I think in Taekwondo we often operate in our little bubbles where it's you and your students are used to you and they know your quirks and whatever it is. But to have somebody step into that environment and say, well, I thought this went really well. I thought you dealt with that scenario or that situation fantastically well. That was a clever solution. But here are a few things that I thought you could look at. Let's see how you could do that better. Did you not think that could have been done more efficiently? You reorganized the class twice there. Was that really necessary? You didn't ask any questions of that person. You forgot to mention that person over there. They didn't know that they were in the gym. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, I could improve. But it's very difficult to, if you've never done it before, it's really quite challenging, and you have to liberate yourself from your ego to do it. I think it's an experience.
We're doing it now also in our instructor induction courses. The way that works is we have an online course anyone can do once they get to blue belt.
Yes.
That covers off the sort of the theory parts of it, and then they have the practical training day with Mr. Mike Lowe, who is our facilitator for that. And it's a practical day where they learn some stuff and then they split into small groups and they try it, teaching each other in their small groups. Mr. Lowe will walk around making notes and then he'll bring them in, give them feedback. So the whole day is doing that, which is, I think that's amazing. That's an introduction to instructing that's come such a long way. And so we're doing that before. Everyone has to do that before they go for their black belt. We stole that idea off Norway as well, where they had this thing where you have to do 6 months instructing.
It's the culture course almost.
Yeah. So we're doing that at that level, but we don't do it after that, which is something we could work on, where you're open enough to let someone critique you. I think that would be really, really healthy and useful thing to have, and at least try and do a little bit more of. It's not easy though, because we've all got that sort of imposter syndrome where we feel like, oh, we don't know what we're doing anyway. I mean, we all feel like that. We all feel
for sure
exactly the same. And you just got to have some feedback. Other sports must do that all the time, right?
Of course.
Their coaches.
Of course. But
so why
again,
don't we do that?
And the bit that's sometimes missing is just that we tend to live in our little silos. Most, other sports particularly the team sports, nobody coaches independently. Nobody's ever on their own. So there's always someone to talk to. And I think that's one of the differences, that the tradition within the martial arts is that you coach on your own. You might have an assistant, but the relationship is very defined. Where, you know, the idea of having, you know, mutual or co-coaches, or having somebody who is the senior coach and they're delegating work to a number of other coaches and so on, it's just a little different. I think we're going to grow into it, because I know in the larger clubs, like for example yours at Warrior, in Trondheim as well, with Master Anderson, when you get to a certain scale, the only way that you can actually do things is to delegate, is to give other people responsibility to, and then there's an onus of responsibility to manage, to mentor, to support. Otherwise, the development doesn't happen. And as you say, the standard that you would be so proud to achieve in one club under your own supervision cannot be, you know, and you may have to accept that the standard is going to be different, or the culture will be different, but it can't be managed if you don't have those systems in place, and if you're not giving that feedback and nurturing and supporting these coaches in their growth. So I think, yeah, that's really been for me the goal of this conversation, is to kind of see, I think that could be even the summary. It went from the one-to-one to the one-to-many, you know, and the kind of being a community of friends to a slightly more structured community of practice facilitated by an organisation over a number of years, kind of, you know, motivated or pushed on by growth. So it's a brave new world to be involved in, and very exciting if you're approaching it with an open mind, I think.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, that sums it up nicely. And I think we're at this crossroads where we need to be planning for the future carefully, and setting up some systems and mentoring that will enable the next generation to become better than we were at instructing, and to come through. Because I'm always a little bit concerned as to the not new clubs starting all the time, because I'm thinking, what's it going to be like in 20 years time? We need new clubs coming through to keep the legacy alive. You know, that's our responsibility to do that. So it's very, very important stuff that organisations have to address, and if their membership is declining for some reason, they've got to find ways to try and keep it at least level, you know, and hopefully keep it building.
Absolutely.
It's really interesting what you're saying about other sports. I've never really thought about other sports. They work in teams, don't they? They're coaches.
They do.
They're,
yeah. But also the idea that they don't always. So even depending on, you know, what the sport is, the idea that the athlete moves through, you know, and is passed from coach to coach as they move through a system, rather than being chaperoned the whole way through by the same coach. It builds different relationships. Really different. Yeah, it definitely builds different relationships and leads to kind of different conversations around, we'll say, I suppose, how does that coach support a person when they know they're only going to see them for a year or 2 years, versus where we could see a 6-year-old and imagine where they're going to be in 20 years' time. Was still having a relationship with us that's evolved over time. So, you know, there isn't time for the relationship with the coach maybe to evolve over a year or 2 years, but there is time for that coach to have an input, and there's a responsibility to deliver the athlete forward to the next coach, having achieved something, having prepared them for that. And yeah, I think there's a lot to be learned from, you know, the challenges that face people in a team environment, you know, versus what we have.
What are the attitudes like in Ireland concerning a student that wants to change clubs and go to a different instructor because he wants that new level of teaching?
You know, and it's a really interesting one, because it often happens just because, you know, organically people move, they change cities for a job, and that's never a problem. You know, that's just, well, okay, circumstances, so here we go. But it does sometimes happen because, and I mean, I can give, like, not named, but some very simple examples where it happens that one club has 3 senior fighters in the same weight class and only 2 can make national team, and, you know, that it can be a thing. Or you can end up in a situation where someone feels like, oh, that club is providing 4 classes per week for me and this one can only provide 2, and I'd like to go and train there. And generally speaking, so far, it's reasonably well managed most of the time. The coaches will generally have a conversation before any transfer takes place. in general, as long as the athlete is on good terms, with the club that they're leaving, it isn't an issue. The issue is always where they've had a falling out with the instructor coach over whatever happens to be, and now they're looking to find a new home, and you don't want any of that toxicity bleeding back into the relationship between the coaches. So understandings have to be found generally, and we found that it doesn't always work, but the tighter the group and the better that the clubs locally collaborate with each other, the less of an issue it's tended to be. So in other words, if everybody feels like they're involved with the clubs all of the time, it's almost like if a student is training in my club, they know they're going to see the instructors and the students in certain other local clubs all the time. They can go and train with them. It's not going to cause any problem. If they want to move club, okay, I won't feel great about it perhaps, but it's not going to cause a problem. The issue would become if it became that huge barrier to where, well, it's going to put a strain on the relationship between me and Stephen Ryan or me and Kevin Kinsler because of that movement of the student. Then it becomes something that we have to have a mediated solution to, and that can be a tough skill, because in the end, I suppose it's not that the customer is always right or the student is always right. It can just be that the fit isn't right, and so we need to move on. And sometimes if for an instructor, it's putting the ego behind you and saying, well, okay, I'm not happy with this isn't how I'd like it to be. I would, but as long as it's dealt with courtesy, if the person is coming to you and they make their explanation, these are the reasons why I'd like to train elsewhere, and they're honest with you, then it generally, for me, it's no issue. Even if my ego is damaged to some degree, it wouldn't be a big issue. The problem becomes when it's sneaky, it's underhanded. There's there's something going on in the background that's not good.
Yeah, I think it always comes down to communication and respect. And if someone's up front with you, no one has a problem with that happening. And I've always been okay with it, because I think one of our sons was doing really well in soccer, and when he got into a new squad, he got a new coach, and that was in that sport. That was a good thing. You moved to a different coach because you needed different skills, and it was a progression. Where, as you said before, in our sport, you tend to go right through with the same person, and if someone leaves you, it's considered a bad thing. But I don't think it has to be. And if the person wants to go and that's for their progress, I think go for it. I don't see that as a loyalty issue.
You've also, I think you'll find a different attitude to it. So I would say you'll probably struggle with that more within Auckland than you would necessarily in, somewhere on South Island or in Rotorua or somewhere like that, because I think people who are in the more, not necessarily rural, but away from the main universities and so on, the students grow up and we get very used to them moving away to go to university, to go to college, and that happens. So there's a certain amount of we're ready to let go at some point in time, can be a part of it. But where there's a reasonable expectation that a person will go to university, they'll still be training in the club, they'll finish university, go into employment, they'll still be training in this club. It becomes harder to accept that, well, I'm going to university, yes, but I'm also going to transfer to that club over there because I want to do better at national team, or because I want, they think I can grade to black belt sooner than the tradition or the standards in this club might allow, or for whatever many reasons. My friend is over there, or, it could be anything. But we've certainly seen it's within the bigger cities in Cork and Dublin that we see the difficulties, because access to more local clubs is more of a thing. Whereas I think it tends to be older teens and adults who will look to transfer rather than younger children most of the time. And those older teens and adults, typically transfer either because of some competitive goal or because there's been a personal falling out, usually with a parent and the instructor, or, something like that. And it's moving away from, a bad relationship as such. And in those cases, it's usually, well, that's just best for everybody. Okay, let's facilitate this, and away we go. But if it's over something like competition, or they feel that there's a better standard in another club, as long as that's broached properly, usually that's okay. But it does cause some consternation sometimes, in the same way as someone. As we've had many times, someone is competing in a different style, like kickboxing or something as well, and the two start to clash, then the communication is the solution to all of these. But the more you're looking to control every aspect of the student, the more you're in for some disappointment, I think.
Yeah. Oh, sounds fantastic.
So, Master McPhail, did you want to maybe tell us a little bit about, because I certainly wanted to finish in relation to your online platform, because for me, that very much seemed, set up to help any student learn a little bit more about Taekwondo and engage with content that was out there and different people who had something to share from the teaching. But I found it very useful from the beginning as an instructor and as a coach, because of the ability to learn how other instructors and coaches tackle the same issues and problems as I'm facing. So do you want to maybe tell our audience a little bit about tkdcoaching.com?
Thank you. It came about through wanting to, I think the original idea was I wanted a database of ideas that an instructor could go to, not running out the door to training, but to give them ideas of how they can teach a class, or because we all get a little bit stuck for fresh ideas. So that very originally, that was what I thought would be nice to have, a little video diary. And then once I started, I sort of realized that, man, we've got some amazing instructors who are doing fantastic things around the world. Wouldn't it be great to be able to capture this on video, and we can keep it forever and learn from all the great coaches and instructors out there. So it sort of started with that, and then it's developed into a whole range of different videos on different topics and so on. But more recently, it's come back. I think it's moving back to helping instructors mainly, rather than practitioners or students as such. I'd really love it to be a go-to place where instructors can learn, because learning remotely now is a thing.
Definitely.
After COVID, so there's no stigma around that. We can learn online perfectly well. So we can be teaching and learning new things with the platform. And the idea of a fly on the wall, just sitting and watching how someone teaches and taking that in, I think is really, really super valuable, even if you may not be interested in the content of what they're teaching necessarily, just seeing how instructors teach. So nearly all of not all of them, but nearly all of them, I'm trying to capture an instructor teaching rather than just someone talking to the camera. Having said that, there are different videos in there, of course, but so it's very much an ITF thing. I want to keep it sort of ITF Taekwondo pretty much, although occasionally there's a guest self-defense thing or whatever. And geared for the instructors to really help them with their job of to continue to learn and continue to get new ideas, fresh ideas, new content, quality stuff. It's become a little bit difficult because I'm not traveling at the moment. I can't grab anyone and video them, like when we were in Ireland when that storm hit.
That's right.
The hotel. I grabbed Hong Louis and chucked him in the boardroom and made him do a video for me, poor guy. And
well done.
So none of that at the moment, and we've got no visitors coming in that I can video too. So I'm relying more on local people, or I'm doing a few new collaborations with people overseas to try and just open it up a little bit more interesting.
Nice work. Well, absolutely. If anyone hasn't checked it out, I would highly recommend people take a look over at tkdcoaching.com, Master McPhail service. You'll definitely find something of interest if you've any interest in ITF Taekwondo. So we might finish there. And again, a huge thank you for joining me and for getting up early in the morning, even in the middle of lockdown, to come and chat through this topic. So if people have anything that's of interest to them or any question that they want to ask, hit us up on any of our social media or in the comments of this video, and we will definitely get back to those between now and the next session. So Master McPhail, thank you very much, and for everybody else, we'll see you next Friday.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate what you're doing too. TKD Coach Academy, amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.